Coming to you from deep within the swamps of the southeastern United States, this is a paranormal podcast unlike one you've ever experienced before. This is the Westgate Paranormal Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Westgate Paranormal Podcast. My name is Eric, and I am joined once again by my wife, Amanda.
Hello.
And tonight's episode, we are going to be talking about spirits and object attachment.
Yep.
So, this is a very loaded subject, and no pun intended. There are lots of different stories. There's a lot of different theories, a lot of different ideas. It kind of runs the whole gamut. And I'm sure, as most of you are aware who have seen any movies, shows, anything involving any of this sort of stuff, that it can kind of range from anything from, say, being a toy, a doll, or something like that, to personal items like jewelry, all the way to things like houses, vehicles, whole entire properties. So it's a lot to kind of discuss and look at. So we are going to try our best to make some sense of it, and as well as try our best to explain it as best as we know how to explain it, from our own experiences and research and things that other people have shared with us along the way also. So I think let's just jump right into it.
Do you think Michael Keaton has been in any of those movies? He was in White Noise, which we talked about last week.
That's
anyway.
True.
Anyway.
Beetlejuice.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
There you go.
I actually have that tattooed on me. Anyway, so the big thing that I kind of want to start off is this was a really hard subject to look up because there's a lot of bullshit out there. We actually did this topic because of a request by someone on our Facebook page. So we definitely want to put that out there, that if you guys have a topic that you'd like us to discuss, come to our Facebook page, Westgate Paranormal, and we'll talk about it. But yeah, the big thing is like, with a lot of the stuff, there isn't a whole lot of information out there for me to research, because there's no way to, I guess, really scientifically prove that an object is haunted.
It's all basically anecdotal experience.
Yeah, so when we start into the topic of what it is and how it is and why, we're just kind of going to give you guys our best hypothesis, like our best theory on what we think it is.
Right. And I think a lot of times too, like, sometimes people think something has an attachment because something is interacting with that particular object, and maybe that's all it is. There is a spirit that is interacting with an object. Right.
So I guess the first theory of, I guess, object possession, however you want to put it, is when a child forms a bond with a stuffed animal. It being a small kid, you don't really understand the difference between animate and inanimate, and so that teddy bear's your best friend, and you start telling it stuff and talking to it like it's a real thing, and having tea parties together.
I was just thinking tea.
And you cry on it, it shares all of the best moments. And I feel like, in my opinion, the theory that I like the most is this one, is that you are kind of making that object, I guess, come to be.
Yeah,
And-
sort of like a golem.
Right. Right. So you, in fact, are giving it that positive energy, that negative energy. You're talking to it like a being. It's kind of like Tinkerbell. Tinkerbell starts dying because nobody believes anymore. And then once everybody starts believing, she comes back. And I feel like that's kind of what we do with inanimate objects. We start believing that, you know, whatever your teddy bear's name was is a real thing and it talks back to you. Well, maybe eventually it does.
Yeah.
You know, that's one theory. What theories do you have?
Well, I mean, I agree with that wholeheartedly. You're basically feeding it energy. It's like, as a child, especially with a toy, a doll, teddy bear, anything like that, to them, it becomes like in their imagination, it's a real thing to begin with.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's a whole lot of energy being put just to that sort of thought formation. And then you connect that to actual religions, cultures, spiritual practices and stuff. And that's precisely what we have with like idols and
right.
statues and everything else throughout history. It's more of, I don't really want to say like a philosophically placed purpose of it, but it kind of is. It's almost like when they go to archaeological sites, say like in the Middle East and stuff, they find, excuse me, these little figurines that were meant to act as protectors of their house, per se. And those things are fed, they're taken care of. It's still very popular in a lot of animistic-based religions, very old religions, like Hinduism, for an example. They believe that the statues of their deities actually house the forces and the spirits of those deities, and they perform rituals to them, they feed them, they water them, they change their clothes, they make little houses for them, because that is such a strong connection with them to that. Not really to be confused with, like, say how the Catholic Church does it, because they don't technically claim to worship these things. They venerate them as images representing things, but they still get in front of them and pray to them, offer
Right.
them candles, that sort of thing. You know, people take pilgrimages to areas where some of these statues within those religions perform what they would consider miracles, like, the crying virgin and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's the same sort of thing. And even within Buddhism, this is a really big point that kind of brings it all together too, especially within Tibetan Buddhism. They believe that after you die, there can be in-between states where your consciousness actually kind of collects and goes to, while it's finding its way, so to speak, known as the bardo, and that's sort of like the afterlife. So much so that they believe that consciousness, because they don't really look at it as a soul like how we understand it. It's a collection of your actions, your deeds, and your actual thoughts. To them, that's kind of the same version of what we would consider almost like a soul, but it's all based upon the actions that you took. And they believe that you can come to a point when you're traveling through the bardo that you may get lost, you may get scared, and to the point to where they believe some spirits can even inhabit things like trees, and they'll take on human-like aspects and anthropomorphic features like faces. And it's the same thing with like blessing statues.
Right.
You can't have a hollow statue in your house because they believe that's an empty vessel for any wandering spirit to inhabit. And you start taking care of that statue and giving it offerings, or giving it candles or food or something like that, and you're literally feeding this unknown entity that has taken up residence. So, and other cultures have things that are similar, like the Thais have what they call spirit houses, and they put them out specifically like in their yards and things, and they're sometimes really elaborate palace-looking, in miniature, of course, palace-looking little houses.
Oh,
that,
I know what you're talking about. I've seen those.
You think like a birdhouse that looks like a palace.
Right.
but they're actually for spirits that are wandering around looking for a place to stay. And so they put them out there, and sometimes they'll even put things in them to make them almost like how a dollhouse would be, which is another good example, even with kids.
Yeah.
You know, another scary thing,
Yeah.
dollhouses. So
I guess after all of that, I can kind of cover a few of the things that I know possibly have been haunted.
yes.
That I can kind of confirm.
Yes.
And if there is an area or a place, I'm also going to give you guys the information or a little bit of information on how to go visit these things if you choose to do so, if anybody's interested in that. So the first one I guess I'll cover is the doll Robert that is in Key West. So Robert was given to a little boy, Gene, I believe by one of his grandparents, I believe. I don't know. I'm not 100% positive on that. Anyway, once the doll was given to Gene and in the house, they started hearing voices, footsteps. Gene was constantly talking to this doll. And when no one was around and just out of earshot, the doll was talking back. It creeped the mother out so much, and she knew she couldn't send it back to, the person that sent it to Gene. So she actually put it in the attic and sealed it up.
In a chest in the attic.
Right. Yeah. So the doll, I guess, just kind of wreaked havoc in the house, but not malevolently. It was just super creepy. Apparently it got out of the attic and found its way back into the little boy's room at one point in time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's fairly impressive. And anytime Gene got in trouble, he always said that Robert did it.
Yeah. And they even kept it, if I remember right, even after the boy grew up and moved out, and it was up in the attic in the chest.
Right.
And he came back as an adult years later.
With his fiance or his wife, yeah. And it started messing with everything again. But Robert is now actually on display at Key West Fort East Martello Museum. I think Ghost Hunters or Ghost Adventures, one of them went down there.
Right.
And
Adam the Woo.
And Adam the Woo.
Yeah, and it's in a glass display case with signs saying you're not even supposed to talk to the doll. You're not supposed to take pictures of it. Nothing like that. It's basically don't interact it. Don't sort of make a connection with it, so to speak.
Right. Let me see.
Robert the doll.
So we did one real one, or supposed real one. How about that? So let's do a fake one really quick.
Okay.
Let's see. Oh, it's a crying boy painting by Bruno Amadeo, I believe. So with this painting, it was mass produced and sent out into the populace, and I guess a few people that had bought the painting had a few house fires, and the whole entire homes were burned down, but the paintings were untouched.
That's
in each fire. So there was a big thing with it going around that all of those paintings were actually haunted.
Yeah.
So modern times have come now, and they've actually figured out that it's just because it was painted with a fire repellent. like lacquer on top of
yeah,
it.
Yeah.
So that's a fun one that I guess went around for a really long time
And that was
has now since been debunked.
okay. So it was just a coincidence
Right.
that because it was such a mass-produced item.
Right. And that's kind of why it's like it's a big deal to try to debunk it. Like anything you have, anything that you go into, go in as a skeptic. Like if you go in believing, you're going to find everything is going to be that.
Oh yeah, yeah. You're gonna see stuff around every corner.
Right.
That's sort of like how, like with the movie Pi, Darren Aronofsky's movie, and even the number 23. Like you start looking for patterns, you're going to find them everywhere.
Right.
Because your mind becomes preoccupied with that.
Right. So that just it's just proving a point of, you know, if you hear something, see something, you know, whatever, try to figure out what you know could have caused it and keep looking a little bit more, because the whole crying boy painting would have never ever been a thing had anybody known about fire repellent shellac.
Do your research. That brings up an interesting thought, though. Just with that is the idea that, okay, something has a force attached to it, but say it's mass produced, and say it has split up, so to speak, among 10,000 pieces of these identical things that are mass produced, and everybody is experiencing the same stuff. Now, that brings up an interesting sort of theory with like people who have been in contact or affected in some way by a malevolent entity, so to speak, or a demonic influence, that it's kind of like the idea that you basically have opened a channel and the spirit world itself operates sort of outside our frame of reference for space-time. So it knows where you're at all the time and can contact you or come in contact with you at any point in your life, anywhere you are, because you've already sort of opened that channel. You've made the phone call and you've left the phone off the hook, and it's always listening. So it's a sort of an interesting thing, because it's almost like if it's possible for something mass produced to have, say, 10,000 people all having the same effects playing upon them,
right?
It's kind of like almost a portal with each one of those.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, and that's also, I guess, I don't want to say something that's like haunted, but say like what we were talking about with statues. They serve a certain purpose. They have a certain iconography, symbolism with them, and say, you know, it's a mass-produced statue that's used in some sort of dark ritual that everybody that has this expects the same sort of effects, services, whatever you want to talk about. So it's almost like how the idea of a tulpa is, because enough people, or like what you were saying when we were discussing this earlier with chaos magic.
Yeah.
Like one person can just make up a random thing, say like an urban legend, say like Slender Man.
Mm-hmm.
Enough people start believing in that, and this goes back to another Buddhist idea of a tulpa. If enough people believe in something so strong and put so much energy towards it, either being afraid of it or being subservient to it or something, they're actually coming together, like making this thought form that sort of is beyond space-time and creating this thought form in its own sort of power, I guess.
Yeah.
Like the idea of a witch's coven, you know, enough of them get together and it's a cone of power. They concentrate it all for one purpose.
Right.
So, I don't know. That was just my thought on it.
Actually, if you want to kind of go into that, I know it's a little off subject of like the haunted stuff, but we can get back to that, or spirits attaching to things. Witches with the traveling of water, like,
yeah.
Since you were on witches, we were talking about this earlier at lunch, and I thought it was interesting. But what was your...
Well, like the idea that cities or locations that have a preponderance for a lot of paranormal activity, say, you know, like Salem because of things that have happened there, or New Orleans because of the practices, Savannah because of its history and its practices as well, and closer to us was St. Augustine. Especially for my own personal thoughts on it, like say St. Augustine or New Orleans or something, where water travels through an area. And this could even be just like some remote like farmhouse that's known to be haunted, but it has a natural stream coming through it. That's coming, through natural structures where that spring is coming up through limestone. So you have the whole idea putting together of multiple theories, like with basically like the holographic rock theory, or what some people refer to as like the rock record, so to speak, that it kind of absorbs all these energies around them. And then you have something like water that's moving through it. That in itself is creating a static charge when water is flowing. So you have all of this energy surrounding these bodies of water, these creeks, these streams, these rivers. It kind of goes back to the old idea that in order to, so to speak, trap a witch or not be able to be followed by a witch, there was this sort of old wives' tale belief that if you crossed a running creek, the witch couldn't follow you because they couldn't cross running water.
Yeah.
Because the water is powerful enough to actually absorb their own energy as they're going across it, because it's already carrying energy with it. And then by something else coming in contact with it or going by it, it's actually sort of draining it and pulling it into itself. And that's, it's an elemental force in itself too. Even within different religions, within the Catholic Church, when they make sacramental blessed water, holy water, they exercise, basically expel the negativity from what they're doing. They take salt to represent the earth, and they do an exorcism spell on salt, and then they take the water itself and do an exorcism spell on water, and then they blend the two together and sanctify it and call it holy water. So it's exercising the spirits that are within it and binding it to a higher purpose, so to speak, like a sanctified water. And some people, there's also a little bit of back and forth with that, because some people believe that there's holy water and then there's sanctified water. And sanctified water is actually holier than holy water, and they use that in exorcisms and things like that. It's holy water plus 10 against magic possession or something. I don't know. Yeah.
So, kind of along the lines, because I'm kind of curious where the conversation will go on this one. It's the Basno vase. It was made in the 15th century in Italy. It was found in 1988, and it had a note along with it that said, "Beware, vase brings death." And this is actually a real one. Like, this hasn't been proven incorrect or false yet.
Right.
So it was auctioned off, and it sold for $2,300. And then 3 months later, the owner died. The next owner died similarly after 2 months. So the police finally, I guess, confiscated it and buried it out in the middle of nowhere.
Oh, so it can just kind of kill anyone that comes around.
See, and that's kind of what I'm curious about, because if you have an object, say this is true, like I said, I can't say whether it is or it isn't. It sounds a little crazy for me to believe. But say you have an object like that, and you don't know these things, and you're just like, well, fuck it, I'm just going to go bury it out in the backyard, and you live next to a creek.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that there's a possibility of, like, having that seep into the water?
Well, there are practices that a lot of people believe that if you have an object that has something bound in it, really the only way to do anything with that object is just, in fact, to bury it.
Right.
You shouldn't destroy it, because a lot of people believe that you are actually releasing energies that are in it by a violent act of destruction. Even the fact of people like keeping it in a case and surrounding it by salt and stuff like that, I don't really know how I feel about that in some cases, because yes, there are practices where you are basically doing binding rituals, making a circle of salt, because the circle is, symbolic of an eternal, never beginning, never ending thing. It binds it in. But when you really think about it, if you take something and sit it down on a surface and make a circle of salt around it, you've put a circle of salt around it. And that's in one dimension. This thing is a 3-dimensional thing. So basically you would have to bake it into a block of salt on all sides.
Like fish.
Right, like fish, yeah. Haunted fish.
You
would have to really encase the whole thing in salt if you think about it. I mean, it's more like symbolic if you're just doing a circle.
Right.
So that's where I kind of have problems sometimes with certain practices. Like, I think it's more of like a psychological thing. I mean, obviously it does have effect on something, so whatever. But maybe there's like a resonance with the whole, I don't want to say like a pyramid structure of it, but that's kind of how it's seen. And by some people that I've researched in the past, that's like, well, the pyramid is what you see up top, but it's really a reflection of something that also is a mirror image of it underneath. So if you're doing that circle, it's basically encasing it like an egg above it and below it. You know what I mean?
I see that.
Stretch.
Yeah, it is a stretch, but that's where my thought would go to it.
Yeah, I get too analytical with everything. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people believe you have to bury it, and whatever effect that has afterwards. I mean, people bury statues of Saint Joseph upside down in their yard in order to try to get him to help them sell their house. I mean, that's sort of a contorted practice, bringing in like hoodoo and different folk magic beliefs within, a Catholic idea of it. But yeah, just the idea of it's almost like you're tormenting something when you're doing that too. You're putting it in a place where it can't have any more purpose. And they did that with vampires, or who they thought were vampires back in the day. They would bury them and fill the grave with concrete, or they would put concrete caps over their grave and steel bars to try to keep them from escaping. It's kind of the same thing, I would think, the way I see it.
Speaking of, you kind of touched on it. I really love when you talk about my favorite pot that's filled with horrible things.
Pot that's filled with horrible... Oh, Palo pots.
Mm-hmm.
Palo Mayombe. By a lot of people considered... I'm not trying to sound in any way an expert on this, but the idea of the Palo pot coming from Palo Mayombe, a South American Afrocentric sort of voodoo-based kind of practice, I guess you can say. A Palo pot is sort of the same as taking something and burying it, except it's used for, more often than not, a more malicious purpose. It's basically a cast iron cauldron of sorts, and they will put someone's remains, like their bones, inside of it and fill it with earth and herbs and various other things, and then wrap the whole thing in chains and locks and stuff. And the whole purpose of it is to basically take the essence of someone's physical being and draw in their spiritual being and enslave it for their own purposes. It's sort of like
creating a zombie. Basically,
yeah. Like after someone is already, and a lot of theories are that that's why people created zombies themselves, like the real zombie,
like Serpent and the Rainbow type stuff. Yeah,
that they would poison them while they were alive. It puts their body in a state of torpor, sort of like a comatose state, so people would think they were dead, and then they would be buried. And at some point later on, these people would go back and dig them up. And more often than not, historically, they would do that so that they could use them as labor on their farms in Haiti and things. But with the Palo pots, it takes it one step further. And while they're alive, they're basically enslaved. But with a Palo pot, it's after they're dead that their soul is enslaved. So they can do things beyond the physical realm for the person who owns and controls that Palo pot.
I just think that is like the craziest and coolest, and it's just that blows my mind.
They had one on that Oddity show.
Yes, they did.
Yes.
That's why.
I totally forgot about that.
And I
till just
feel
now.
like, and I'm probably wrong, but I feel
Sponsors.
like either Zaffis or Zach Bagans might own one.
I don't know.
I don't know either, but I feel like either one of those shows has been to where there is one, or one of them owns one.
Right.
I'm just not 100% positive.
It's very possible.
Yeah.
It's sort of like a spirit from a person version of a Dybbuk box in a strange sort of way.
Yeah.
Because
yeah.
a Dybbuk box comes from the Jewish faith, where they're actually taking a malevolent spirit and encasing it in something so that it can do them no harm. Whereas the Palopot is taking the spirit of somebody who was once living, an actual human, and binding it so they can do their bidding.
Right. And I cannot remember the movie, but there is a really good movie based around a Dybbuk box. It does have Modest Yahoo in it, and that's pretty much the only person I can remember in it.
Right.
But the movie's excellent.
And I think that's what really exploded the Dybbuk box on the scene to the general public.
Right,
too.
right. So the real story behind the Dybbuk box is in 2003, a Dybbuk box was sold on eBay. It was originally purchased in Oregon at an estate sale. And it was the guy bought it as a wine box.
Yeah, because that's originally what it was.
Right.
It was a Jewish wine box.
Right.
Their sacraments.
And it was bought from a woman who was 103 years old.
And it had just been, like, found in her attic or
Correct.
something like that? Yeah.
Correct. So the guy gets it home, opens it up, and weird shit starts happening to him.
Right.
So, get this. This asshole goes, "It is fucking my world up. I'm going to give it to my mom." So he tries to give it to his fucking mom.
Wow.
And shit starts happening to her. She had a friggin' stroke after it was given to her.
That's right. Yep.
So, all right, so much better than this. After he gets it back from his mom, he goes, "I'm going to give it to my sister." He gives it to his fucking sister, and she goes, "No, thank you. That's far too much bullshit for me." And then that's how it got on eBay.
Right.
Um,
And then the guy in Kirkland, Missouri.
right.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. The one who bought it on eBay, or somebody who bought it from him, brought it back.
Yeah.
And did not. It's kind of like the doll in Antiques and Uniques.
Yes.
They didn't want their money back. They just wanted him to take it away from them.
Right.
And so, yeah, that's when it went on eBay and then was sold in 2003.
Right. And the guy was in Kirkland, Missouri. And if you go on YouTube, you can actually find interviews with him that people have done. And he shows the actual Dybbuk box. And what he actually ended up doing was creating, I want to say like a gold leaf or some sort of metal encasement that he actually surrounded the whole box with that had Jewish writing in it. Or actually Jewish writing, Hebrew writing. It was based around like Jewish prayers or scriptures or something like that was meant to contain the spirit within it so that it could not escape, period.
Right.
I don't remember exactly, but it's something along that line. Just go to YouTube and look up the Dybbuk box, and spelled Dybukk or Dybbuk.
Hold on.
Or...
I have the exact spelling. Dybbuk.
Okay. Yeah. 2 B's, 1 K.
I got you.
Thanks.
I got you. So the last major item that I found on this adventure, aside from Annabelle, we all know Annabelle. I really don't feel like I even need to bother with that annoying movie or doll or...
Yeah, the old Raggedy Ann doll.
Right.
Yeah. It's yeah.
If you don't know about Annabelle, just...
Where have you been?
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, so The last item is Myrtle's Plantation, and I'm going to give you guys the information for this a little bit, or at least the area. Myrtlesville Plantation Mirror. Supposedly, Myrtle's Plantation is the most haunted plantation in the South. Period. End of story.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I feel like whenever we watch something and they're like, we're the most haunted, I'm like, bullshit. Because I feel like there's tons of other places. Anyway, I'm rambling. So, supposedly this mirror is haunted by a woman named Sarah Bradford Woodruff and her 2 kids. And the story behind it is that they were poisoned, like oleander poisoning, I guess was kind of a thing.
Yeah, it definitely was.
I don't know much about, poison. It's not my forte. But let's see. So the mirror is on display, and they say that there's like strange handprints that show up on it,
Yes.
and like just strange like marks, and they're inside the mirror.
Right,
Like they've cleaned it, they have tried, they've done
Always
everything.
comes back.
Yeah, it always comes back. So if you guys are interested in going to Myrtle's Plantation, it is in Francisville, Louisiana. It seems legit. I think we've seen a couple shows that have gone to it, and it's kind of creepy. I mean, there's a lot of hokey stuff with
Myrtle's
any place,
Plantation
but
itself
yeah,
is a haunted place, and it's
yeah.
also alleged or thought to be the place where Madame Lalaurie from the French Quarter in New Orleans, when her house burnt down during a party that she was having, and I believe this was in the Victorian times, when her house caught fire, the people went into Madame Lalaurie's house there at the corner of Royal Street and discovered that there was a slave woman who was chained to her oven in her kitchen, and she had set the fire because there was a party there, and she wanted basically to escape. So that was her method of getting people's attention. And it was discovered that Madame Lalaurie actually had basically these converted or hidden rooms within her house there, where she was basically doing this macabre medical experiments on slaves, where she'd peel off their face. There was one that was contorted like a crab, put in a cage, all their joints were broken, and all this stuff. So for fearing for her own life being caught doing these Dr. Frankensteinish sort of experiments on people, she fled New Orleans, and people thought that she had gone to St. Francisville in that area where Myrtle's Plantation was, and stuff, which was the premise of that pseudo mockumentary sort of thing, the St. Francisville experiment.
God, I hate that movie.
With Hans Holzer and stuff. Like the beginning of it, they go over a lot of like actual information,
right,
but then it just becomes a Blair Witch sort of, we're going to be locked in this old plantation
the
house
end
in St. Francisville, and yeah, it's an older movie. It's not the most well known. I enjoy it, but it presents itself as a documentary and then kind of goes crazy from there. But some parts of it are perfectly possible.
Absolutely.
So they present it in such a way you think you're actually watching a documentary.
Yeah, that's I think why I hated it, is because it
sucked you in.
Yeah, it sucks you in, and then you're like, God damn it, it's one of these movies. So I think that's why I'm pissy about it. But also with Madame Lalaurie and Marie Laveau and all of that, you can also, if you want entertainment side of it, there's always American Horror Story Coven. If you guys haven't watched that season yet, they they definitely dramatize. Well, it's American Horror Story; it's nothing but drama. But at least they give you kind of a background of these types of people that we will eventually end up talking about.
Right. They do take a lot of historical facts and they dramatize it and make it fiction. But yeah, so I mean, that's an awesome place. If you go to New Orleans, you can go in and take tours of the Lalaurie house. It's been a lot of other things since she's moved out. It's even been an apartment building and stuff like that. But it's a it's one of what you think of the French Quarter when you see the French Quarter on TV and stuff. If you've never been, a 2-story Victorian style revival mansion that's right there on the corner that has that big wraparound balcony around the second floor with the elaborate ironwork railings and all that stuff. It's a really cool place just to even look at it, but that's the history of that. So, and that kind of, so, you know, making fun of St. Francisville Experiment, the movie, at what point do you say, okay, I believe this, I believe that, I believe this, I believe this, but this is just crazy. You know, it's like, we've talked about this too. I know this isn't exactly the topic of what we're talking about, but I think
I do
it plays
it all
in.
the time.
It's like, you know, okay, you see things on TV and you're like, well, I think that's just BS because I haven't seen it. But then you're like, well, but that's possible. And at what point, you know, do we really draw the line? Because I'm the same way. I think, and I think a lot of people are, and I think a lot of people should be, in a way that, you know, you're more skeptical because it makes you look deeper. First of all, it makes you research and it makes you actually question, did I just hear what I think I heard or
Right.
saw what I think I saw? It's like if you think that, okay, I can get a recording of someone who's dead on an audio recorder as EVP, and I'm perfectly fine with that, but I don't believe that something can move something across the table. I mean,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
kind of like that.
I am that person. Like, because until I see it happen in front of me, I will never believe that an object can move by spirit.
Right.
Because I haven't witnessed, and I think that that's where I
But
get.
you have.
No,
With our French doors.
no,
Them unlocking
no. I
themselves.
heard it.
Okay.
I
Well,
heard it. So our house is definitely haunted, and you know we hear things. We have EVPs from our house. We have tons of stuff, and neither one of us are bothered by it in any way, shape, or form.
and I think a lot of it just comes home with me sometimes. When
Oh, well,
to
and
other
that's
places, too.
the thing. He comes home from work sometimes, and I let him know when he needs to sage the house because I can feel a difference in the house. But and that's what he's talking about is we have little latch hooks, one on each side of a door, just to kind of keep the animals from roaming literally all over the house. And we have actually heard it go from the side that's actually locked to unlocking, and then it goes to the other side, and it'll lock that latch.
Right.
So, and why he's like, well, why don't I believe it? Is because I've never seen it happen. I've heard it. I have sat here and heard it unlatch and then latch again, but I've never physically seen the latches come undone.
Yeah.
And until I see that, I still will just pretend it doesn't happen.
I think the biggest thing really involving our doors like that, remember a few years ago we were in bed and we have a door at the end of our hallway that leads back to the bedrooms. And we always used to shut that door and latch it. And it's a solid shut latch door. And we were still awake and we were laying in bed and we heard that door open and then violently slam shut again. So my first thought was somebody broke into our house. So I jumped up, got my gun, and ran through. I'm like, oh, that's just the door opened and closed itself.
Yep.
It only happened that one time,
Mm-hmm.
but it was enough to make us think. You know, we didn't automatically think it's something paranormal. It was just somebody's in our house. You
Right.
know,
Right,
that's
which
the first
should
thought.
be your first logical
Yeah,
response
it's
to
true.
that.
Yeah.
If you immediately jump up and go, "It's ghosts,"
Contact me, it's got a demon.
I think that there's a problem you might want to address.
Yes.
But yeah, no, I'm one of those people. I have no problem saying, yeah, I'm good with EVPs. Like I believe that is spirit talking. I am 100% down with that. So the flashlight thing, I have witnessed for the first time last week at Antiques and Uniques, and I still don't believe it.
Yeah, that's it's a catch-22 with it in a way, because I even explain it when I'm doing tours with people. You know, this is what we think's happening. If we can have it continually happen on command, so to speak, on cue, within a few seconds of asking a question, not sitting there for 2 minutes. Oh, look, it just finally turned off, and thinking it's something preternatural.
And see, but it was responding correctly, and I still, even witnessing it, I still am just like, I don't know, man.
And I'm like that when people tell me personal experiences. I'm like, that's a really cool story. And then I'm like, but I don't know if I completely believe that may be your perception. You may believe that that's what happened, but maybe there's something. Did you look for a cause? And this is coming from me, who has lived in houses where the doors will open with the deadbolt still out.
Right.
Who, at one of the places we go to at work, where I have physically seen a stuffed animal being thrown across the bed when nobody's within 5 feet of it, and I still question things. I mean, I think it's kind of necessary that you always question before you just jump in and say, oh, this is what it is.
Yeah.
So, and recently, even that place, one of the guys that I work with was, and I talked to the guy who witnessed it there with them too, that there was a box fan, one of those big square tall fans that people put in their windows or sitting there, on the floor. And it was in one of the bedrooms of this place, and it got thrown across the room in the same way that stuffed animal did.
See, and I immediately, even with your story, even with your stuffed animal, I still don't believe it.
Yeah.
Nope.
Yeah. Well, that whole place has cameras because of that. And that was the guy that I work with. When this other person that was on the tour with him told him that happened, like, the guy that I work with heard it from the other room, but he wasn't personally there to see it. And he's like, well, I'm just going to go back and check the recordings.
Right.
Because every square inch of that place has a camera that is recording 24/7 all the time. And so that's what he did. He went back and he's like, sure enough, that guy walks into the room, and this box fan that's sitting over in one corner of the room launches itself across the room. Violently. So he's like, what are you going to do? It happened,
Yeah.
But that's also a known place with malevolent activity where people on a regular basis, get scratched and stuff like that too. And every single time I go in there, when I'm using the Echo Vox or the Spirit Box or any of those sorts of systems, it always tells me to leave, and it knows me by name. And my coworkers, the same thing. It tells them, get out, leave, get the hell out.
Calls them whores.
Yeah, all sorts of crazy stuff. So
where I go in there and all I want to do is cry.
Well, this is over at the apartment, though.
Oh, yeah.
This is over at the British Pub apartment.
Gotcha.
Down in Anastasia.
I haven't been there. I don't know if I want to.
Yeah.
But, so I guess we can kind of go into, like, objects and houses, like actual house hauntings and poltergeist activity, I guess. Briefly,
I think that is a good segue. Like, if you can have a doll or a statue or an old pocket watch or anything that has something attached to it, a house is really just a bigger version of something like that. And then the property it sits on, even, like...
See, and I think that's got a big thing to do with it, is the property and what happened on it, or, whatever. I think a brand new housing development can be just as haunted as a house that was built in 1920.
Oh, yeah.
And it's all because of what you're building on.
Yeah, I agree.
Because people people just don't pay attention to nature. People don't pay attention to the ground they walk on. They just don't give a shit.
Yeah,
they trash it. They do whatever. We build houses on it, destroy everything.
I mean, look at the most haunted cities in the South, with Savannah, St. Augustine, New Orleans. We build right on top of cemeteries, and we know the cemeteries are there. And we do road work in St. Augustine, and we're finding bodies, but yet...
And then they put them back.
Yeah, and they're still there, and just, okay, well, if there's a historic cemetery sitting underneath this bar,
Yeah.
They know it's there. I mean, so I think there's a lot of... And that goes into the idea of why we even... Historically, why we place things where we do. Like, where the Talamato Cemetery is... in St. Augustine, that was chosen as a place to create that Catholic cemetery in 1777 because the Indians that had come there from Georgia, just referred to as the Talamado. They were Guale Indians, but they came there in the early 1700s, and they used that land as their cemetery.
Right.
So when the Catholic Church put their cemetery there, they were putting it, on the Indian cemetery to begin with. And so what
That
makes
is
them
insane.
What makes them choose these locations? And that's the thing. It's like there was already some sort of connection there with the earth that the Guale Indians believed was special enough to put their deceased loved ones there, their fellow tribesmen. So it had a connection to them for some reason, first of all. And then later we go on and we put our own cemetery in that same place. So it's kind of like, is it like maybe a source of power and they recognize that and it just sort of historically goes down? You know what I mean?
I think that it was just a middle finger to them.
Yeah, I mean, that could be a good point. But these Indians also they converted. That's the only reason they were allowed to stay there.
I think that they were either giving a middle finger or they went, well, their dead are already there, so we should probably just bury ours there. I don't think a whole lot of thought went into what they did.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think it was just, well, I mean, they already got holes dug there, so let's just start shoving ours in there.
And now we don't, there's no real record of the Indians who are buried there because their markers are long since gone at this point.
See, and I would be a pissed off spirit too.
Yeah. I mean, and that's a good point. It's kind of like these places where people build on. Oftentimes we don't know, what happened there. Sometimes we don't even know what happened there 100 years ago, much less 1,000 years ago.
Right.
And why we're having activity in a spot. Who knows? Like the property that my parents had outside of Athens, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
When you would drive on, and it was a remote area. It was down Farm Road 315 south, outside of Frankston, Texas. But we said Athens because that was the mailing address for most of the stuff there, which is a suburb of Tyler, Texas, in East Texas.
Which I lived.
Yeah, which...
miserably.
As soon as you would pull onto that property from the main road, your car radio wouldn't work anymore. Things would physically materialize in that house, sometimes just on their own. There was an old wine bottle, never been opened, but an antique wine bottle that we walked into the kitchen one day and was just sitting on the kitchen counter.
Yeah.
Nobody put it there.
Crazy.
That's also the house where I was saying one of the doors would open several times a day with the deadbolt, a 2.5-inch deadbolt, one of the long deadbolts still sticking out of the door, and it would be wide open. I went there to visit when my parents, after they had moved in there, the very first night I stayed there. It was like a smaller house, guest house built onto the main house, so it was like really one long skinny house. And the first night that I stayed there, I thought I heard growling coming out of one of the rooms that was connected to the living room on the side of the house I was staying on. So I didn't really think anything of it. It was like scuffling, growling noises. So the next day I asked my mom if she had an animal in there, because my mom raised exotic animals, and oftentimes they were in our house. And so I thought she had a raccoon or quadrumundi that she was keeping in there. I didn't even know what the room was. So when I asked her, she's like, that's the laundry room. There's nothing in there at all. And I was like, well, all night long I heard something scuffling around, scratching on the floor, and growling. And it was nothing at all.
That's crazy.
So
see, and growls, until I hear one, don't believe it.
Should have been with me the other night.
I know. Well, I am going to go back and do one more investigation at Antiques and Unique tomorrow.
Yep.
So maybe I'll get growled at.
Yeah, 2 nights ago when I was doing a tour there, we were all standing in the main part of the building, which is not a big building, but they're renovating the whole thing. So the antique store is basically gutted at this point. And we were all standing there talking because a couple people had already experienced things back in the little hallway that used to be the alley, but beside the building. and we were kind of basically just standing around discussing different ideas of what could be there, other things that other people had experienced in that building. And as I'm talking, over my left shoulder, I hear a very distinct, very loud, aggressive growl, and everyone in the group heard it too. And I just stopped talking, and I'm like, I don't even remember what I said. It was because it took me so off guard. I was like, am I the only one that heard that? And everybody's eyes were like, oh shit. Like, because they all heard the same thing, and they all looked at me and backed up, and they're like, that was a growl.
That's crazy.
So, and it sounded like it was maybe 10 feet behind me, like, but it was not like a growl you would hear from an animal. It was just this deep, guttural, aggressive, I'm going to rip your throat out growl from something you don't see. And that's it. It just happened that one time. But it was enough to make me be like, okay, we just experienced a growl, you know?
That's nuts.
So, and it's not something that happens frequently in even a place that's haunted unless there's something malevolent there. You know, happy spirits don't go around growling at you any more than, you know,
I totally would.
any more than, like, you know, your favorite school teacher's gonna walk down the hall and flip kids off and be like, fuck you know.
I am so excited and looking forward to becoming a spirit.
Oh
You
my
have
God.
no idea.
You have this obsession.
I am so excited. I'm gonna fuck with so many people. It'll be amazing.
It will be amazing. Yes.
But so, with that being said, and kind of talking about objects and houses, I know we talked about land, but I feel like there's definitely a way for you to invite things into your home. Not that I'm
yeah.
recommending it, because I feel like Carlotta, the house I grew up in, was kind of part of that, where I think my mom bought me a Ouija board, and because I know I wasn't old enough to buy it for myself. I think I was in like 6th grade. And I remember having a friend over.
You didn't just go to Toys R Us and shove it under your shirt and walk out with it?
No, not in 6th grade.
Okay.
No.
You waited till 7th for
Yeah, definitely.
your monstrous compendium for D&D. Yeah.
Absolutely. But I remember in 6th grade, I was sitting with the girl that I was friends with, and she wanted to mess around with the Ouija board, and I had one, and so we did. And then after that house was not too comfortable because we didn't close anything. Nothing has ever been closed there.
Yeah, and that is a creepy fucking place.
We actually were there today.
Yeah. We're going to be doing an investigation there soon because it's about ready to be sold. So at this point, it's vacant.
Right. So when we went upstairs, I thought I was going to pass out immediately. I got so dizzy. But yeah, the house is super creepy. So yeah, I feel like if you're not careful, you can invite things into your home, and if you don't shut it down, they'll stay there forever.
Right.
And they'll just keep coming.
Yeah. It's very true. And it's like, I am not a Christian by any means, but so it's sort of hard to suggest to someone, for me anyway, I say, well, whatever sort of belief system you have that works for you, use that to your advantage. Every belief system has some sort of method of protection or blessing or something like that. So I'm not going to, say, well, say the Lord's Prayer, say a prayer to St. Michael or whatever. But, if that works for you, then use that if you feel that is what's actually working in that situation. I don't really think that something that we can say, quote unquote, is demonic, is automatically something coming from a Christian hierarchy or, any sort of particular religion. I think these energies are ancient, archaic energies that are beyond what we may try to label them as. They have existed longer than we can fathom. They're, like I said, they're beyond space and time as we know it. And so there have been tactics that work within certain religions, like exorcism and things, but there are many different methods of going about those exorcisms. Most all religions have some form of exorcism, and basically it gets results in one way or another, whatever way you do it. So,
Yeah.
you know, even religions that you may not think have any sort of exorcism rites involved with them, if you look deep, they almost every single one of them do.
Yeah.
Every one of them. Even within like Buddhism and Hinduism and stuff like that. I mean, one of the practices within Hinduism that has been brought over into Tibetan Buddhism, at least, is Tantra. And Tantra, one of the first things that they do with that is to experience their own death. And they basically are told to go out to I can't call it a cemetery. They basically do, they'll do cremation, and what they'll be told to do by their guru is to go out to these graveyard pit-based places, basically, and find an abandoned corpse. Because if you've ever been to or seen pictures of India, you know, when they cremate sort of out in the open these people when they die, your body does not completely burn. Even in a modern day crematorium, they put the remaining bones in a grinder and stuff. So when they're on a funeral pyre being burnt, there's still pieces left over, and you know, they send them out into the water. So look at pictures of like India, and you'll see that like body parts wash up all the time. Dogs carry around femur bones. You find skulls on the banks of the Ganges and stuff. So anyway, as I'm getting way off topic trying to describe this, the whole idea behind Tantra is you have to first face your own death before you can really master your life. So they're basically told to go find body parts or a whole corpse if they can, and sleep on them and meditate on them and stuff like that. And that's why they have like the kapala, the skull caps that they use for offering bowls and things.
Wow.
So they all religions, all belief systems have some form of expulsion or exorcism rites built in. It's sort of just like in the bylaws of each religion, I guess. I don't know. So, any final thoughts with a lot of these things?
No, not really. I think that the big thing to know about it is that there's not a lot to know, because there's not a lot of proof, or I don't know. I mean, there's museums full of haunted artifacts. So, I mean, best thing I could do is say go check them out. I think Zach Bagans has one in Vegas.
Mm-hmm. He's got a house that's full.
John Zaffis has one up north.
Yeah, he's got several barns that he has built on his property that house, because he's got so much. And this goes back. It's not just a modern thing. Look at Boris Karloff and the Mummy. You know, the Curse of the Mummy. That whole thing. That's, you know, bringing these ancient artifacts in from Egypt. They all, you know, the whole myths with them having curses associated with them. This goes back thousands of years. It's not something new. This has been around since mankind has started kind of thinking all these things are vessels. Some of them are created on purpose, like golems, puppet dolls that are supposed to be used to control a person, like within voodoo and things like that, all the way up to modern times. Like if you listen to Pat Robertson, you're telling me, don't buy used T-shirts in thrift stores because they're probably demonic.
Yeah, this dude thinks
and
that...
I'm shaking my head like him as I'm saying this, even though you can't see it.
This dude thinks that everything you buy from a thrift store is demonically possessed. Like, my brain cannot wrap around that amount of stupidity.
Well, it's Pat Robertson.
God, I know. I would like to end this saying that if you guys heard any snoring during this, aside from yourself, we do record during our dog's nap time.
Right.
Yes, they do have a nap time,
and
which it's almost over.
At the beginning too.
Right. So, you know, we apologize for any snoring. Please come to our Facebook. It is Westgate Paranormal. Leave us a comment, give us a like. Let us know what you guys want us to do for our next episodes, and we'll do it. We have absolutely no problem. And if not, then y'all will just have to listen to us babble for an hour or two next week.
Right. We really, really like input, questions, comments. Please, share it. Come on, Westgate Paranormal on Facebook. And we also have a Patreon page that we've started. Doing these things is not cheap because it's really out of our pocket. I'm not begging you for money, but if you become a patron on Patreon, you can find us there also as Westgate Paranormal. And that helps us to research more, travel more, pay for the equipment that we use to make these podcasts and do our investigations. And like I said, we have an upcoming investigation of a house that we're going to be doing, and
we will be filming as well for that too, so we'll have a YouTube.
Yeah, we'll be doing filming EVPs and things like that, but our plan is too that some of the stuff we're only going to make available to our patrons through Patreon. So I've got the tiers set up right now. Basically, if you pledge to support it through Patreon, they're very reasonable. $1 a month, $5 a month, or $25 a month. And of course, you can do as much as you want. But that basically just helps us a little bit because everything that we do as most paranormal investigators comes out of our own pocket and our own time. We work real jobs, even though I'm lucky enough that my real job involves paranormal investigating as well as, doing tours of these places while we do investigating. But, the company's really only paying me an hourly wage to do it. So it's not like we're rolling in the dough like the people you see on TV doing some of this stuff. We are just like everybody else, and we've built up what we have by our own experiences and by our own pockets. So we appreciate it. Thank you very much for another successful podcast, and we're gonna focus on what our next ones. We've got a whole list of different topics we want to cover. So
yeah, but we want to hear from you guys because sometimes y'all think it's a good stuff for us to look up. So alrighty, we will see you guys next week.
Thank you very much, and until next time, y'all take care. Bye bye.